Hey, I'm Jamie.
And I'm Richard.
Welcome to Guitarist Tone Lounge. And today we've got a really interesting new electric guitar that will be perhaps familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, because most people have heard of Taylor guitars,
yes,
the great Californian acoustic manufacturer. Their CEO and master luthier, Andy Powers, well known for his innovative thinking and sort of high quality luthiery. He's now sort of created a kind of, I don't know what the right phrase would be, a parallel company or a sort of offshoot called Powers Electric, to do things that Taylor can't in its kind of, main role in life. And this is what we've got here. So, Richard, tell us a little bit about this A-type electric.
Well, I like the idea that he basically made this guitar for his inner child. It was the kind of guitar he wanted as a teenager, but wasn't available. So he clearly had interesting guitar designs going on in his head from quite a young age, didn't he? So I feel that this is great because it doesn't sit squarely in any one category, though it will cover those things. I mean, it's got that kind of Fendery twang, hasn't it? But it's essentially a hollow body. So it's quite lively at volume, and it's got more body to the sound perhaps than your typical Telecaster or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean that's well worth picking up on, really, because I mean on the face of it, we mentioned the sort of Fender influence. It's a Californian guitar. You've got the sort of automobile sort of surf kind of connection.
Yeah, custom colour, right? Yeah.
But as you mentioned, it's not a solid body as it might appear. It's actually a sort of semi-hollow body with urban ash back and side. So urban ash is a type of wood that it's used in municipal plantings of trees in California. The trees reach the end of their safe life cycle as roadside trees, and they get taken down, and normally they're turned into mulch. Andy Powers picked up on the fact that it's actually a pretty good tone wood, what they've called this urban ash, and they made it into some guitars for Taylor and now for Powers Electric. So the back and sides are urban ash, as mentioned, and the top is maple, and that sits on top of some hollow cavities, but obviously with some reinforcing parts to support the hardware.
To support the hardware, absolutely, which is all designed and built in-house.
Yeah. So that's the first thing to mention, is like Taylor, for all of its finesse, is a mass manufacturer of things. This is very much more of a sort of small workshop, passion project piece, isn't it, really?
Yes.
To the point where, Andy Powers is a surfer. We mentioned the Californian connection. The switch tip, or rather the tip of the trem and the volume knobs are made from the sort of layered up resin from making surfboards.
Right.
When you're sort of putting the resin on and it sort of piles up and eventually you get this nice effect. So that's a nice touch. Again, it's a boutique touch,
and they feel nice to use as well.
Yeah.
They don't. Some plastics feel a bit sticky and not very nice, but they feel great.
Yeah. And it's a unique touch as well. We mentioned the hollow body. Let's move on to some of the more fundamental things. We've got a one-piece mahogany neck.
Yes, and that's quite a nice handful. It's medium C is how I've read it described, but it could be like a Les Paul neck.
Yeah,
I think.
I would say so. It doesn't feel as Fendery as you might think.
No, and it's glued in as well, even though it looks bolt on.
Well, you mentioned Gibson there. I mean, it hasn't got a Gibson scale length, but it's got near as damn it, hasn't it? 24.8.
24.8. So what's that, about 5 mil or something? I don't know. It's not much.
It's a tad longer than a Gibson scale length, basically. So it's got that nice sort of loose but playable feel to it. Honduran rosewood fingerboard.
And is that the headstock facing as well?
Yeah, although it looks like it's a different piece, perhaps a little bit more figured and ornate.
Okay. Yeah.
And interestingly, as they mentioned, the nut doesn't pierce the headstock facing as it might. It sits actually on top of that. So there's some very nice detailed finesse work here in the luthiery, as you might expect. And the other surprise is perhaps looking at the styling of this guitar, it's actually a set neck, isn't it?
Yeah, to have a glued neck. Yeah, because the finishing, very much, you would think you were looking at a bolt-on. Yeah. But and that's going to make its own contribution as well. Of course, like the scale length, it's going to pull it more into the Gibson territory, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Again, there's not much on this guitar which is just off the shelf at all, actually.
Well, no. I mean, this bridge is very interesting, actually, and it's got the Delrin pre-compensated sort of bridge plate, but I noticed that is adjustable. You've got the height and the intonation adjustment on it, and this is a very in-tune guitar, isn't it?
Extremely
we've obviously played it before we started filming.
Yeah.
And we've both noticed that it's very in tune all the way up as well.
It sits beautifully in, doesn't it? And The other thing is there at first glance you might think, oh, that's a Bigsby. It's not. It's actually a thing called a CamTail vibrato, which again is very Andy Powers. He's come up with his own design for it. It was obviously inspired by the vibratos of the past, like the Bigsbys.
Yeah.
But the sort of there's a cam almost for each string, because if you imagine that each string, if you've got a thick gauge string, it's going to rotate around a cylinder at a different rate to a thin gauge string, and so he's put different profile cams on it for each string. So
that's quite an engineering thing to do, isn't it? Yeah, and it works really well. It feels really good. Yeah. Holds its tune very well for such a thing. I mean, I know that from the factory they come with a screw to set it so that it doesn't go up; it just goes down. Though you can remove the screw and have it going both ways. I mean, I'm guessing that you inevitably will probably tune up more than you might on a Les Paul without a trem at all, but it's pretty well behaved. Yeah, it's pretty well behaved. And then when you come to the other thing, which is kind of completely unique on here, is the pickups. Yes. So what you've got here is pickups which look P90ish. They aren't really P90s. They have an aluminium cover and an aluminium base plate, and they come in two flavors. One is the PF42 and the other is the FF42. So that's the warmer one.
This is the warmer one, and the reason it's the warmer one is the FF refers to full Faraday, as in a Faraday cage, because the effect of these two, the base plate and the cover, is to sort of I guess shape and influence the magnetic field of the pickup.
Yes. Yeah.
So in the FF flavour, that's the full Faraday flavour, you get a warmer, jazzier sound. With the PF, which is the ones we've got, PF42s on here, it's a brighter, arguably more Fender sound.
Well, certainly the attack is brighter anyway, yeah.
I think that's been influenced a little bit by the Fender's Jaguar, with its kind of like tooth-like kind of cage around the sides of the pickup.
It reminds me of that in general styling, in the surfy sort of
something quite Jaguar about it in general, actually. So I think with that, if you want to pick it up and play it, we've heard a little bit already from Richard playing it very beautifully at the start of the video, but let's hear some sounds. This is through a Fender Tweed Deluxe that we have here, or a Blues Deluxe, I should say. We've just got a little bit of hair on the sound, and let's have a go.
That's the bridge. I'll just give it. I just wanted to switch between the two. It's very balanced. It's a very different sound. The bridge is a lot more bitey, isn't it, I think? And the neck's more mellow.
Oh, definitely. And I think what's interesting is, this idea of perfect intonation, perfectly in tune, is a real hallmark of Andy's designs. Like with the acoustics he's made, he came up with that V-class bracing. One of the benefits, or the claim benefits for that, is that it sort of aids intonation further up the neck. Again, with this, what the effect of that very nicely intonated Delrin bridge and everything else about this is that you hear a lot of detail when you're playing chords. You hear all of the harmonic detail.
Yes.
When you're sort of just noodling about, you hear a lot.
Super easy to get a sound as well. Because I know a lot of the time, especially with this sound where it's got a little bit of hair on it, it's deceptive, isn't it? Because it sounds like, I just plug in and that's what it sounded like. Well, in fact, that is what happened with this. But quite often, it's quite a hard job to get a balanced sound, isn't it? Like the low strings will be too boomy and the top strings will be too sharp, and you can't get it sat right. But this is out of the box, haven't made any adjustments at all. Can't say that always happens, actually. Quite often you do a couple of tweaks just to get something optimised. And this is already done, really. Beautifully set up as well.
And these are these are audio taper pots. What are they? They're quite...
they're the Bournes. Yeah, they're 1 meg, which is pretty high value. I mean, and the tone control has a particular value of capacitor which slips my mind at the moment, but as you bring it down, instead of suddenly being a massive blanket over everything, you
can hear that, can't you? It's almost more like a sort of pedal action rather than a falling off a cliff.
Yeah. So you could just zero that for an alternative sound.
Yeah.
And the master volume there has a treble bleed on it as well, which has also been quite carefully thought out. I don't think they've just slapped a capacitor in there. I think it's been very considered.
I mean, let's. Do you mind if I have a little
course.
noodle as well? I mean, one thing that one effect of the hollow body is that it's quite light, isn't it, in the hand?
Yeah, it's less than £7, though it's not. You know, 'cause sometimes you get a really light body in the neck. You know, especially whether it's a relatively chunky. I think, in my opinion,
The balance
it's
is
very
good,
balanced,
actually, isn't it? Yeah,
very comfortable.
It's a really good point. I hadn't even thought of that. And actually, we spoke about California, that range of likes of soul and R&B.
Yeah, and it strikes me that because obviously I was using a fairly thick pick then, and you're using your fingers, and the way that the different players and the different sounds, and it seems to really respond well to that.
It does, doesn't it?
Middle pickup selection there that you did, and that was really nice and chimey.
Yeah, I think that's a good sort of sign in a guitar, isn't it? That it doesn't work in with just somebody playing a hard kind of little jazz 2-pick or something. It works for. Again, it's sort of giving off sort of quite telly vibes, I would say, sort of telly neck.
Yeah. I mean, I love a good telly actually. That's great.
And of course, we've got the vibrato here. I was going to say trem, but more accurately.
I know people get cross when you say tremolo. Yeah, even though that's what Leo Fender called it. Yeah.
Well, quite, and I think we're so used to it. I might as well say tremor, but.
I remember doing a video on a PRS of some sort, and there was a T at the end which stood for tremolo, and we had to sort of kind of point it out gently to somebody.
That's true. It's one of those things that always, it's just one of those things, isn't it?
It sounds a bit sweet.
It does, doesn't it? It's got some of the sort of Jazz Masters, slightly looser, gentler feel, like there's a bit more nuance in there. But maybe it's the effect of that individual cam design.
Yeah, I bet they all play a part. I mean, it's hard not to sort of lapse into cliche, isn't it? But when you play those last couple of chords, are quite shimmery. It's quite complex. The sound, if you see what I mean.
I'm going to hand it back to you because what I'll do is I'll turn the volume up on the amp a little bit so we get a little bit more dirt on there. Let's hear how it sort of responds to that, because it's not a metal guitar by any stretch of the imagination, but people will play it with a bit of drive.
But a bit of drive is a lot of fun.
So go for it, and I'll turn the wick up.
I'm impressed with how it's holding on to its definition, because that is kind of cranked. I mean, obviously we're not kind of in a room with the speaker, but or we wouldn't be maintaining this composure, would we? But, the transformer kind of going out. I mean, you can hear that the amp's driven really hard, and I suppose that doesn't make for the tightest sort of bass end, but it's keeping its clarity.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where the benefit of all of these measures, the Delrin saddle, which has been pre-compensated, the multi-cam design on the vibrato, all of it sort of gives you that clarity and focus and cohesion that when you start to muddy things up, it sort of shines through, doesn't it, really?
And I wonder how much experimentation must have gone in, because the one meg pot. It's a lot of the time you put one of those on a Telecaster and you're kind of bleeding from the eyes, you know. But that really seems to suit this, and I'm guessing there's a warmth coming from the hollow body construction.
And the pickup design, I think.
And the pickup design. That, which reminds me, actually, I would be quite interested to see, while we're on this dirty sound, I'm just going to play for a moment with it wide open and then bring it down to about halfway or something like that, just to see what the treble bleed is like.
Idea.
I like what I'm hearing there a lot. That works really well.
Yeah, and again, you're saying about the taper as well. It feels like there's no sort of falling off a cliff with it.
Yes, you're not suddenly, you don't have to be really, I mean, I've had guitars before, I've actually stuck little bits of luminous tape to the sweet spots just to make sure that I don't
go over the line.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? And some of them, the falling off a cliff happens within the first millimetre of travel as well, which is not very helpful, is it? Okay, well, we've heard it through an American style amp, the Blues Deluxe. We've also got a Vox here, and to give it the guitar its due, we should probably hear it through a sort of mid-first kind of British amp as well, and see if that Californian design agenda carries forward to a slightly more...
See how it translates?
Yeah, see how it translates. Good idea.
Right.
Okay, as promised, we're now through a Vox AC15, and give it a go. It's got a bit of hair on this tone, so let's hear it.
It brings out a certain kind of chord in me.
Yes, it does.
It's lovely for those jangly chords, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a real jangle machine amongst other things.
I nearly thought twice about going on to the neck pickup. Before now it's going to descend into mush. Perhaps it's an instinct, because that does happen so often. But
again, that harmonic composure really has allowed the pickups to do more than perhaps they might in other guitars.
Yeah, and there's I think the taper of a 1 meg pot is slightly different to, say, a 250K or whatever.
There's more.
It's more. I thought less was more. No, let's not get into that. Have a play. Some of those chordal things that you do sound great on there.
Sort of telly vibes out of it sometimes.
Yeah, I must say it's quite rewarding. I don't know if it's something that comes across or might be coming across to the viewers now, but to pick up a guitar and hit some chords and have that sound come out is very pleasing indeed. It's not
very much so.
An easy thing to do.
So even with slightly more complex chords, it sort of really just sort of does the business, doesn't it? I don't know if we can turn up the gain on that one just to hear it with a little bit more welly.
Yeah, let's do that now. Are we top boost channel? Yes. Here we go.
Okay. That's on the middle pickup. It's quite nice and loose sounding. It's quite vintage, really, I suppose I would say, more than... nice, actually.
Great. I mean, I'd say well judged, sort of, with all the different components and everything.
Yeah. Got bite, but no treble that hurts the ears. I'm going to hand this to you, Richard, because you're a super soloist, so I think you'll be able to really write some more.
I like to keep expectations low where possible. But I should try the backing down as well on the volume. It gets a little bit of extra spank, but it's just what I personally would want to hear, and you've got quite a full. I went off the cliff. Yeah. I mean, I'm sat right on top of the amp, so if you're hearing a little bit of hum, then
that's
it's inevitable. Yeah.
Well, we've heard some sounds. If you want to chuck it back to me, Richard, we'll talk about some final sort of details on this that you might not notice straight away. We already talked about the resin plastic components on here. We've already talked about the aluminium pickup covers, although these have got a sort of pearloid facing on them. We've also got things here. This sort of double arch inlay here, which is just in acrylic. Sort of reminds me actually of Yamaha did a sort of inlay that was a bit like that on some of their guitars.
Yes, yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the SG sort of series ones. But a casual glance at it wouldn't reveal some of the cool features. Like this, the sort of lettering you see in the metal here is hand stamped, so it's not just like they haven't gone ka-chung with a big machine and then pushed the next one in.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's got some bespoke features for a guitar that's
Oh, and of course, there's the neck joint. Yeah, that's very nice. Actually, I noticed it. Straight away.
Well, it is, isn't it? And you're looking for the 4 bolts that would inevitably be there with this sort of chamfered heel in a lot of guitars of this style, but it's not. One-piece mahogany neck, as mentioned, so that's kind of cool.
And that's the shaping of it is great.
This has got machine-turned aluminium cover on the control plate, which is really cool. I mean, that look is sort of synonymous with things like biplane instrument panels and things like that.
Yeah, it's got a retro vibe, hasn't it?
Yeah, really nice. And again, the hand stamped sort of kind of, well, I think that's a serial there, A518.
All right.
And one thing I would notice is that the headstock, which is very slightly reminds me of a sort of Music Man-y sort of shape.
Yeah.
Has quite a strong back angle on it. It's raked back quite far, isn't it?
Yes, it has. And I've noticed that the way the tuners are positioned, it's got quite a good straight string pull.
Yeah, no string trees for that reason. I guess that's why they've done it like that. And there's quite the nut, has obviously got enough, there's enough break angle over it to not need that. And I like that because, sometimes tuning instability does come from those string trees. They ping away, don't they? And they grab at strings.
I found that I've ended up raising them on a couple of strats I have. You can get the kind of taller thing, but then you've got to cut the nut so well to get round it. But everything like that is done so beautifully on this, like the fretting, the intonation.
Yes, it's all very.
I guess that's sort of part of what you're paying for, isn't it? Because you could, in theory, buy a cheaper guitar, but you'd have to spend an awful lot of time and have the expertise to get it playing like that does.
Well, at that point, I think it might be a moment good to sort of stop and summarise what we think of this guitar. Really interesting normally when we do tone lounges, we have production line instruments. And while this is made by a man who's very experienced in making guitars at volume, very high quality guitars at Taylor, this is a totally different fish, really, isn't it?
It's hard because I know we've been comparing it to production line guitars just because that's the sort of vocabulary, isn't it? Got the fat twang of a Telecaster or more like a Gibson scale length, that kind of thing. But it really is its own thing. Yeah.
So, let's talk about prices. This is not, an entry-level instrument.
They're not giving them away, are they? No.
No. So, as you'd imagine, it's made in a small workshop, with oversight from Andy and everything else. So, this version is the, it's called this is like the solid colours version, and that's the cheapest you can get. So, that's $3,899. and you get a variety of auto industry inspired solid metallic finishes.
Yeah, I like that, the custom colours vibe, yeah.
But they do come in figured top with trans figures, finishes
Oh,
like
the posh
sunbursts.
tops, and yeah.
And that version, the Select, which is what they're calling it, which has got like a figured top, is 4,399. And there's one above that which has got like lavish the nicest quilted maple they have in stock, and that's 4,599. So there's quite a big uptick for the beautiful woods. I personally would say that the whole vibe of this guitar leans into that Fenderish tradition.
I quite like it, and I think it will age well.
Yeah, that's right.
It will wear a bit of wear with class. Yeah.
So 3,899. It's in the same, competing in the same markets like Fender Custom Shop and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's not an outlandish price if you were in the market for that kind of level of care.
I mean, and it definitely, it will hold its head up.
Yeah, I mean, if they brought in this guitar and it was like a real sort of, ultra small volume collector's piece, and it was like $6 or $7 grand, you might think twice. I don't know, but it would be a different proposition to what this is, which is, like I say, on a par with custom shop instruments by other makers, and yet you could argue that it's got some unique things like the resin knobs, the sort of machine turned colours,
and the bridge,
that make it just a little bit more like a handmade thing, even than a custom shop guitar. But I mean, that's all aesthetics and cool stuff like that. What about its actual functional utility as an instrument? I mean, could you play lots of gigs with this, do you think?
I think so. I mean, I suppose my background has tended to be kind of more rock type stuff, but I'm really impressed with that. I mean, and as a sort of studio player, it's quite often you think, I just need something with a little bit of edge or something like that. I'm thinking maybe, that Sam Fender type thing. That's been a reference point for a few things that I've done. I think that'd be perfect. Put it on the bridge pickup through an AC30 or a Fender, and it's very easy to get a sound.
I think you're right, and in a way, I look at this as almost like a latter day Telecaster, in the respect that if you take it in the studio, it's okay. Telecasters aren't renowned for great intonation. This one does have great intonation, but it also has that three classic sounds thing where there's not a bad one among them, and
no, it's very easy to get a sound.
Quite soulful, quite biting, but the trebles are quite sweet. I feel like for anything that you would customarily use a Tele for, or maybe even a Strat, to a certain extent,
or potentially like a Jazzmaster or whatever. Yeah.
Well, it's got a certain Jag vibe going on with these, full Faraday pickups or partial Faraday, as these are, as well. So I think whilst it is not a Fender or anything really like one, because it's set neck, mahogany, unique design, hollow, etc. There are a few sort of nods to the being in the same neighbourhood as Leo Fender's legacy, really.
I think so, and I think it's really, you wouldn't want to make a guitar that couldn't do that, really, would you? I mean, I suppose, all right, you've got the Gibson Les Pauls and everything, but they've got their thing, and the Fenders have got their thing. And this, I would argue, might make a fair shot, especially with the warmer pickups on it, might be a bit more Gibson-y. And I'm forgetting, of course, that at volume, that's going to be quite lively, which would be great. And more practical these days, because a lot of the time, people aren't taking walls of really loud amps on stage or anything like that. Some of the gigs are in-ear monitors, and there isn't really any sound. But you could play with a wedge, for instance, on stage at a moderate volume. Yeah. Not really for you to hear necessarily, but for you to interact with.
Yes.
And it could be there could be some really cool sounds coming out of this that would straddle the gap, I think. Definitely.
I think in terms of things that, there's not much about this guitar that isn't carefully considered. I would say of its very nature, the slightly sort of offset-y vibe, it means it doesn't stand up like perfectly on its own, so you would want a good stand with it.
Yeah.
But outside
neck stands would be good, actually.
Yes, definitely. But as you say, the neck body balance, it hangs well. Yep. I think there's enough classic tones in there, or things that are suggestive of classic tones without being too anodyne or generic, that you could use this. And I think maybe its ace in the hole, as it were, is that great intonation, because I think for singer-songwriters, as opposed to, general rhythm guitarists or general soloists, the fact that the chords hold their composure and coherence really well on it is nice.
So easy to get that. I mean, it sounds like a silly thing to say, really, but, it's quite rare, really, that you'll pull a guitar out and not
Yeah.
have to just get it settled in
Yeah.
or anything. And you know, in a situation like this where an instrument has been, you know, to the photography department and it's been through all these different hands, and sometimes you find, you know, and they put all the tuners in, you know, was it photography tuning we call it sometimes, and you have to get it back and have to get it settled in, and this has just been so well behaved. It's been a pleasure.
And I think you know, at the end of the day, if a guitar should do something, first and foremost, it has to be in tune, you know.
Yeah.
And so that is the Powers A-type in the standard sort of format here with the solid colours.
We've had to mention the case.
Oh yeah. Before we finish, we should mention the case. Comes with what they're calling a gig bag. It's quite a bit posher than that, really. It's got this sort of plaid finish, which is inspired by 70s Porsche seat upholstering. We're told. And it's rather nice. It's well padded inside. It's kind of you know, it's secured in there very nicely. You know, these days, what we call a good gig bag is probably a handier and ultimately more useful proposition than an old hard case, isn't it?
I mean, if I were going to fly anywhere with it, then I'd get one of those hollow cases and I'd just put the whole thing in there, and then you'd know it was going to be all right at the other end.
So there we have it, the Powers A-type. We've had a lot of fun playing it. We hope you've enjoyed hearing it, and something different for once in our world of guitar.